Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the latest studio album from Suicide Silence entitled, Remember, You Must Die. I've listened to a lot of metal and deathcore and extreme music over the years, but I can honestly say this is the first time I've encountered a record that has told me, reminded me that I must die. Like, that's kind of funny to me. Like, these motherfuckers are just like, hey, you! Yeah, you! Not you, not you, move aside, you! Remember, you must die. Remember that, motherfucker. Remember that. This is the 7th studio album from Suicide Silence, often credited as being one of the most important, iconic, and influential bands in the deathcore genre. Albums like The Cleansing, No Pity for a Coward, The Black Crown were instrumental to the development and success and popularity of deathcore in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Years later, I would go as far as to argue that these albums probably stand out as being some of the best kind of classic deathcore albums out there. The Cleansing especially is probably a top 5 deathcore album for me. Despite that, though, Suicide Silence have genuinely struggled in the past decade, partially because of some personal tragedy, the passing of Mitch Looker back in 2012, but also because they've just consistently struggled to continue releasing consistent music. I mean, 2014's You Can't Stop Me Now was fine, it was competent, if ultimately forgettable. But 2017's self-titled album, their infamous detour into nu metal, full-on Korn and Deftones worship, yikes, ew, gross, cringe. A monumentally bad record in every regard. It didn't help either that Suicide Silence were super defensive and super ride or die about the new change in style and sound. As such, people just kind of tuned out. By the time 2020's Become the Hunter had come out and Suicide Silence had returned to a slightly more traditional deathcore sound, the damage was already done. Now what exactly does this mean for Remember You Must Die? I'm glad you asked, but kindly sit down and shut the fuck up. This is my video, not yours. This means Suicide Silence are gonna have to kick an absurd amount of ass if they intend on reclaiming their throne atop deathcore mountain. It means it's going to have to deliver everything that fans want from Suicide Silence, while also throwing in some things that they don't want. A few unexpected twists and detours. Nothing too drastic, nothing too wild, nothing too self-titled album-y, but, you know, a few little bits and pieces to show Suicide Silence haters and naysayers that, you know, they still got a little creative juice left in the tank. And they didn't do that. Yeah, I gotta be honest, I'm not really feeling this thing. I'm leaving this the same way I left You Can't Stop Me Now, just kind of feeling underwhelmed. You know, like, it's fine, it's competent, it's not, like, offensive or terrible or anything like that. It's just meh, you know? It's mid, as the kids say. It kind of just reaffirms to me that Suicide Silence have lost their mojo, and it's fair to say that whatever feelings you have about Suicide Silence going into this will remain intact and unchanged. It starts off decent enough with the multi-part title track, Remember You Must Die, full of dark, brooding energy and muscular riffs and gnarly percussive beatdowns. There are plenty of crunchy, snappy grooves and rhythms, and it's urgent, it's in your face, it's straight to the point, it doesn't waste time. I respect that. I can get down with that. I can get down with Dying Life as well. It indulges in some modern Cannibal Corpse influence with a slew of lurching grooves and blast beats and monstrous gutturals and some slightly intricate guitar work as well. There are also tracks like God Be Damned and Be Deceived, which are chock full of destructive classic deathcore energy and mayhem. Both of these tracks have their own little tricks and tactics, which I appreciate as well. God Be Damned, for instance, throws in some subtle melodicism to add some extra weight and contrast, whereas Be Deceived is a much more rabid and unpredictable beast. Unfortunately, though, the rest of the material on this album is either too dumb or too basic for its own good, or it shows Suicide Silence very unwisely venturing into unwarranted and unnecessary territory. A great example of the former would be Altar of Self and Capable of Violence. Altar of Self is filled with mindless, repetitive, one-dimensional deathcore chugging, whereas Capable of Violence just... I feel like it tries way too hard to shock and provoke with some really edgy and hostile lyricism. Like, there are a lot of tacky and questionable references to gun violence and rape in this thing. As the band writes, when the time comes, the power's in your hands, sometimes you have to pick up the gun to put the gun down. There's no fucking way they can rape us of everything. At one point, Eddie Hermida even screams out, "Validate my fucking rage," multiple times, and I honestly can't help but roll my eyes and giggle in that moment. Circling back, a great example of the latter, of the unnecessary and unwarranted shit, is Fucked for Life and Full of Void. Fucked for Life veers uncomfortably close back into the realms of, like, the nu metal worship, the Deftones and Korn worship of the self-titled album. It does recover with some more bombastic and aggressive deathcore riffery and pounding, but, you know, it is something that needs to be pointed out irregardless. Meanwhile, Full of Void spends a lot of time very poorly juggling a lot of different ideas and genres and influences and not really knowing what to do with them. It's just kind of a waste of time, to be blunt, and it doesn't help that it's also a bulky and fatty track. If I were working behind the scenes with Suicide Silence on this thing, I'd be looking at them and going, y'all gotta cut this shit off now. Speaking of, the production on this thing leaves a little to be desired. Suicide Silence can't really decide whether or not they want this to be, like, really raw or really polished, and as a result, it just ends up sounding kind of flat. There are also a few extra bombastic and overblown moments here and there where I can't help but question whether or not something is wrong with my speaker. I'm feeling a 2.5 out of 5. It's okay. It's fine. It exists. Whatever. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I enjoyed little bits and pieces of it. I didn't enjoy other little bits and pieces of it. Everyone does a good enough job. Eddie actually sounds pretty good consistently, vocally, across the record. Like I said before, this thing kind of reaffirms to me that Suicide Silence have lost their mojo. And I don't really know why. Maybe it's just because they're getting older. Maybe it's because of the intense backlash to the self-titled album and the complete disinterest in everything else they've done in the 2010s. Maybe it has something to do, honestly, with the passing of Mitch Lucker almost 10 years ago. Maybe they haven't properly processed that, and maybe they just feel weird doing this without him and they don't want to say anything about it. I don't know, but whatever the case, they clearly just don't have that same energy and hunger now that they had back in the day. This is, warts and all, probably the closest we've seen Suicide Silence make a full return to the days of The Cleansing and No Pity for a Coward, and for that reason alone, fuck it. If you pine for the days of classic American deathcore, give this a shot, why not? But honestly, I wouldn't be in a rush to check this thing out, especially not when there's so much great and ambitious and expansive deathcore out there. So much more stuff that is just so much more brutal. So yeah, 2.5 out of 5. They did their best, but their best just isn't good enough anymore. Plain and simple. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. Look, more videos. That's cool. That's neat. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.